I appreciate the opportunity to work with SUU and Better Your Business. And I enjoy this topic that I've been asked to cover, and that is advance yourself. Talking about the ability to plan and be able to move your life forward. As a lot of us are having to make adjustments with COVID. I know for my business, we've had to move things around and readjust and rethink our plans and pivot on top of our other pivot. And I know employment for some people is an issue, and the viability of their jobs in the future are an issue, and the directions of their companies are an issue. And it's kind of a tenuous time right now. And so this topic, I think, is a very good one to be able to address, to be able to look and figure out where do you want to go with your career and what do you want to do. In putting this together, I like the opportunity to be able to be presenting from my office at work, because there's a few tools that I use that I keep here at my office to help me overcome those difficult situations. Sometimes we're just faced with things and we don't quite know how to get around them, and sometimes it feels like we need a little bit of magic. So to help me through those difficult times, I use my elder wand. I pull it out and do a little, spell like Decorworx, and it helps me come up with things that I couldn't normally do. Other times I have those obstacles that are in front of me that I just can't get past, no matter what I try. And for that, I've got another tool that I use, and it helps me cut through those obstacles in a unique way that I can't use with, tools that has quite the precision that this one does. So it's important to have good tools, but it's also important as we face some of these difficult times to have a little bit of humor, to keep things light, and knowing that this we will get past, and we will be able to move on to better and greater things. As being a business owner, oftentimes people think you've made it to the top of the mountain and you've driven your stake of success into the ground and you've accomplished something. But reality is this, the top of the mountain is really not ever there. You're usually clinging to the side of that mountain, usually a cliff. And as I like to say, you're bare naked and it's butt cold and the elements are beating against you. And it's your ability to continue to scale up that mountain and to find those handholds and work through. Though there may be times that things are easy and a little bit better, there's those difficult times. And that's some of the stuff that we'll talk about today, is our ability to be able to plan and move forward with our life and with our careers. I've taken this presentation and broken it down into 3 areas that I found to be the greatest stumbling blocks for people in moving forward with their careers, and tried to highlight those as good things that you can sit down and think about as we, in the future, as we go through this. The first thing that I want to talk about of these 3 parts is to know yourself or to understand yourself. Oftentimes people just see the world around them, but they fail to see where they fit into it. Peter F. Drucker, he makes this statement, this quote. I love it. I've got to read it, but it's great. He says this: "It's up to you to carve out your place in the work world and to know when to change course. And it's up to you to keep yourself engaged and productive during a work life that may span some 50 years. To do all of these things well, you need to cultivate a deep understanding of yourself. What are your most valuable strengths and most dangerous weaknesses?" So let's kind of think about that a little bit. What are your most valuable strengths and your most dangerous weaknesses? Equally important, how do you learn? And that's really the question is how do you learn? Some people learn by hearing. Some people have to write things down. Some people have to read it. Understand that. Figure that piece out. And the other part is how do you work with others? What are your most deeply held values? Those values that are on the inside. What are the ones that you hold most dear? And what type of work environment can you make the greatest contribution? Notice I said, what type of work environment can make the greatest contribution? I think that's important to understand. And then Peter F. Drucker goes on to say this: only when you operate from a combination of your strengths and self-knowledge can you achieve true and lasting excellence. To give you kind of an example, years ago I worked for a company, I was in sales, and I was sitting down and meeting with my boss. He was the vice president of the sales for the company. And he asked me, Jeff, where do you see yourself in the next 3 years? What would you like to do? Where do you want to go? And, I gave him the standard answer. I think I'd like to go into management. And I remember he kind of leaned back, and if he didn't laugh, I know he at least chuckled. And he said this, and I still remember it. He said, you're an incredible salesperson, but a manager you are not. And at the time, that kind of struck me. And it's like, well, what do you mean? Where am I supposed to go in the future if it's not into management? But it gave me some good insight that I was able to sit down and analyze. I could have taken it and thought to myself, well, he really doesn't know me. He's being kind of pompous and assuming that he knows who I really am. But I sat down and thought about it and realized that my day-to-day communications with people at times are lacking. And he was pointing a few things out that helped me understand some of my weaknesses, but he also helped me understand some of my strengths. And I think that's important, that just like Peter F. Drucker brought up, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Let's just take a moment. I'd like you to write those down. What are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? Once you begin to analyze your strengths and your weaknesses, you can really begin to confront reality. Have the courage to confront reality and start owning who you are and accept what those weaknesses and those strengths are. For me, I have to be honest, I'm not a great speller. And the fact that I've been able to kind of position myself to where I have somebody there to proofread my documents and that is one of those things in my life that I just accept. I know that no matter how hard I try, there's a certain point that it's just one of those weaknesses that I have, but I put people in place to help me with that. Some other questions to ask yourself, and those are you a team player or are you someone that works better on your own? Me, I'm someone that, I know I work better on my own. Do you like to be the one that's in charge? Can you bear the weight of making difficult decisions, or are you one that succeeds and does better as part of a team? And you can feel comfortable having that support of a team around you. Share the same values as the company that you work for. How well are you at staying on task? And what I mean by that, are you someone that can sit at a desk and work on a computer all day long, or doing consistent tasks over and over again? Or are you someone that needs to get up and move around? Me, I can work so long, but I have to have breaks. I have to move around. That's the way I think better. Understanding some of those strengths and weaknesses, but ask yourself, what is the best work environment for you? And then it's important to be honest with yourself as you go through these questions. Don't self-justify. This is one of the things that I found to be the greatest stumbling blocks for people in their careers, is oftentimes when situations come up, they lack the inability to own a situation that they're a part of. In fact, they try to push it off onto somebody else or into some other situation. And that's self-justification. In a book that I really enjoyed, I'm going to give you a quote here, I'm going to move up to it. And out of the book, it's called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. It says this: self-justification is not the same thing as lying or making excuses. It's more powerful and dangerous than an explicit lie. It allows people to convince themselves that what they did was the best thing that they could have done. In fact, come to think of it, it was the right thing all along. Self-justification is a portrayal of the brain that, despite its stated goals or desires, is not interested in the truth, but rather self-preservation. And think about it. When you've been in difficult situations, what does your mind do? It wants to be able to self-justify. It wants to be safe. We don't like to be wrong. We don't like to understand that we are at fault. But if we can understand our weaknesses and work on them and own those things that are ours, then we can get past them and improve. Going on and quoting some more, and when it comes to self-justification, it says it blocks our ability to even see our errors, let alone correct them. It distorts reality, keeping us from getting all the information we need to assessing the issues clearly. And it's because we kind of all see things differently. We kind of put our own lens on it, as Dr. Stephen R. Covey says. We put our lens of the things we've experienced in life, and we tend to say, oh, that's the truth. In fact, to quote him exactly, he says, we see the world not as it is, but as we are. Overcoming self-justification allows us to grow and learn from our mistakes. But if it's always someone else's problem, or we tell ourselves what we need to hear, we cut ourselves off from the very things that will make the greatest difference in our lives. We need to understand our strengths, but most important is that we understand our weaknesses. Okay, part 2 of this section is titled, What Do You Want to Have Happen? And I think those words about what do you want to have happen are really poignant. When we talk about what do you want to have, implies ownership. It implies doing something that you want to bring into yourself. Happen is focuses on your end result. So what do you want to have happen basically is saying is you're going to take it, you're going to own it, and you've got an end result in mind. That's something different than a to-do list, a set of things that you check off. Because oftentimes you may have plans, and I've known people who have gone through a list. I need to check off this, I need to check off this, and I need to check off this. But by the time they've accomplished those, the world's changed and the plan hasn't. So when you talk about what you want to have happen, it needs to be dynamic enough that it can move and adjust with the changes in life. And so, with that, it's important that you plan, that you think about things. So when we talk about what do you want to have happen, I want you to think about, just for a moment, what do you want to have happen between now and 3 years? Just think about that. What do you want to have happen between now and 3 years? Now with that, to kind of help you work through this, I want you to visualize. Now, if you think about in athletics, the coach will sit down and be working with somebody and say, look, I want you to visualize that shot. I want you to visualize this block. You know what? I want you to visualize your turn when you're heading back on swim. To set the mind to where it can visually see and work kind of into muscle memory what's going to happen. And it's important that you visualize your future that way. A fact is individuals, for an example, who can visualize retirement, and I know for a lot of people that seems like, oh, that's way out there, but the people who can visualize it will save substantially more money than people who can't. And so when you visualize something, it builds a mental image, and that mental image then can be translated into something so much more. Now, let's visualize this. And there's a few things here. I know some of you might be dreaming or sleeping at this point. Hopefully not. But I want you to take a moment and visualize. But I'm going to give you a question. I want you to kind of just think about it for a moment. So first of all, I want you to visualize what you want your job to feel like. What do you want your job to feel like? I want you to visualize what you want your relationships to be like. I want you to visualize what your coworkers feel about you. And I want you to visualize what you want your spiritual life to be like. And then the question comes in, what do you want to have happen for you to experience that reality? Now, I know I went through those quickly. We've got them posted here. You know, I use my magic wand. But take 45 seconds and write those down. Okay, now what I want you to do is begin, as you go through this process, you visualize what you want to have happen. Now lay out the steps that you need to do, but remember your strengths, keeping your strengths in mind and your weaknesses. And as you bring in those two, you're starting to deal with a realistic plan, a plan where you're confronting reality and having the courage to face reality. You know, it's important also that as you're doing that you use empirical data, that you're just not going off your gut and saying, well, I kind of want this to happen, or I kind of want that to happen, but that you start using data to make your decisions. Years ago when I first was in business, I was getting ready to expand. I wanted to grow the business, and I had an opportunity to pick up a couple additional sign companies, one up in Delta, Utah, and one in Richfield. And I was working up a business plan. I thought it was a great idea. You know, it came to mind. Heck, these guys approached me about the same time. I could have them work as branches, and I could put a hub here that I could feed those branches with things that they couldn't do. It was working out to a great plan. And I was collecting my data, and I was at the time taking some classes at the SUU Business Development Center. And Greg Powell was teaching the class, and I went through and presented these ideas, and he came back and he kind of challenged me, and he says, you know, these are some good ideas, but I want you to go back and consider this. With this expansion that you're talking about, how is this going to affect your most profitable items that you sell and your ability to generate those profit into other areas of your business? And so he was taking me kind of out of the dream mode and putting me into the empirical data mode. And I went back and I analyzed all of my products and different things that I sold, and it was interesting. I came to an understanding that the products that were the most profitable for the company were those that I was selling into the retail decor industry. And at the time I was selling to Smith's Food and Drug. And as I sat down now and laid out my business plan, I realized, you know, these were some of the things that I went to school for, and graphic arts and layout and design, and that I excelled at and that I enjoyed. And so with this adjustment and this empirical data, I shifted. And you know, that's the result of that is the other side of our company called Decorworx. And I was able to scale it from just being a small regional operation to one that we were able to grow and say, okay, let's be the best decor company regionally. And we measured that by saying we're going to have 90% of the independent grocers in that working with us. And then we expanded it from there and said, okay, let's start expanding the company nationally. So then we expanded into Texas and Louisiana, and just bit by bit through the Midwest and up through the Eastern Seaboard as we grew the company. And it all went back to having that empirical data. But the challenge is having a plan but do you have the best plan? Not just a plan, but a best plan. And being able, for me, it was being able to step back and look at it and work off of empirical data. Both plans could have worked. And it's important that, remember, we always have options, but to work out the best decisions and the best plans. Now, what we do in our company is a couple things. Is one, when we make a big decision, we keep what we call a decision journal. My wife's better at it than I am, but basically what you're doing is you're writing down the decision you made and why you made it, and what you want to have happen. And then you use that to keep track of things as you put your plan together so that you're not led off into the weeds somewhere. The other thing that we like to do in our business, along with the decision journals, is do what we call fire bullets, then cannonballs. It actually comes out of a book by Jim Collins titled Great by Choice. What he refers to is you're expending energy in small ways to a narrow target to make sure you're focused in and hitting it. And you're just firing those bullets to making sure that what you plan on doing will actually work. And then you make small adjustments to make sure you're getting the derived outcomes. So, when you fire a cannon, you're packing it full of tons of gunpowder and a large lead, and it's expensive compared to all the little bullets. What makes a bullet? A bullet is an empirical test aimed at learning what works, and that meets these three criteria. A bullet is low cost, a bullet is low risk, and a bullet is low distraction. Now, when I say low distraction, I mean low distraction to the company. It may be high distraction for an individual, but for the company resources overall, it's a low distraction. You have to still be making money and moving ahead. But it's also something that you can be doing in your life, making sure you're not throwing your life out of whack as you fire these bullets. Right now, in our company, we're having to pivot. And we fire these bullets to adjust what we need to happen. In some cases, we find that we have good success. Other times, we find we need to narrow it down to a tighter target or move it altogether. But this, combined with the decision journal, really helps keep us on track. Okay, section 3, or part 3, and that is intention, or being intentional, plus learning. Bringing those two together, intention and learning, equals advancement. Learning, true learning, is a result of thinking differently and thus providing improved outcomes. If you do the same thing over and over again, you're going to get the same result. We know that. So thinking differently requires you to force yourself to advance in unaccountable ways, pushing your brain into new areas of expanding and thinking and learning. Oftentimes when there's a situation, an idea comes to mind, and we think, oh, that's the answer, because it's the first answer or solution that comes to mind. Again, it may be the first solution, but not the best. It may feel right, and we may say, oh, it looks good, so let's run with it. Our brains, they don't want to work. They don't want to think hard. I joke around, and I've done this for quite a while. I say, my brain is the laziest organ in my body. It does everything it can not to have to work or function. I kind of joke around that it does everything it can not to be useful. I can actually spend more time thinking of ways not to have to think than I actually would have taken if I just would have thought it through. And so pushing ourselves and pushing our brains to think in new ways is important. And it's important to do this, with your career and where you're going, and deciding, like we talked about, what you want to have happen, and being intentional with it, because for me, I had to decide how big do I want my career to be. And what was I willing to give up and not give up? So for me, my family and my wife are more important than my career. My business and my career could have been bigger. But because of decisions I've made and being intentional about how big I wanted things to be, it's all about getting that fulfilling life. And I believe for everything that you give something up. And so it's important to create and have that balance. So it's important to think about what you want your career to be and being intentional, because it's like what we talked about. What do we want to have happen in multiple areas of our lives? But you have to think through it. There's a book, and it's called Thinking Fast and Slow. In this book, he teaches you how to think, really think, in ways that will push your brain into new areas. This will allow you to take information that you learn and process it in such a way that you come out with new results. See, because our brain wants to think automatically and quickly. You know, I drive to Salt Lake all the time, and oftentimes I'll have to look down at my GPS and say, where am I? Have I passed Fillmore yet? I'm listening to a book and I'm just kind of driving, but I'm not paying attention to my surroundings or where I'm at necessarily. My brain has seen it over and over and over again, so it's not recording anything. And so I actually kind of lost track of where I'm at. That's my brain on system one thinking. It's recording the minimal amount of information that it has to do. And so the system one thinking operates automatically and quickly with little or no effort or sense of voluntary control. But the opposite of that is what Daniel Kahneman calls system two thinking. It's effortful mental activities that demand a high level of thinking, including complex computations. So, for example, if I were to say, what's 347 times by 15? It'll take only you guys a moment more to know that equals 5,205. But just that question itself of more than 2 plus 2, when we're faced with that larger number to multiply, it causes our eyes to dilate, it causes our brains to activate, and it causes several stimulus to take place actually within our body as we force our brain to think. So as you look at your life and what you want to have happen, and you're being intentional, it's a matter of thinking a little bit more and a little bit harder than the next person. And being intentional with what you're doing and not allowing your gut feelings and your first impressions to drive your future. Know why you're doing something and what the real costs are. Ray Dalio explains it like this. He points these 5 things out, and it's have clear goals, identify and don't tolerate the problems that stand in the way of you achieving those goals, accurately diagnose problems to get to the root cause, design plans that will get you around them, and do what's necessary to push through these designs to the end result. So I'm going to bring up here this loop, and this is, you know, the exercise of figuring out. It's kind of a continuous loop that we have in life. But I'm going to bring it up here. And so if you look at it here, first off, you have clear goals. And you want to move ahead with those clear goals. But problems get in the way and they stop you from achieving those goals regularly. But then this is what comes in, is accurately diagnosing what is the real problem, what is the root of the problem, and then design a way around it so that you can continue to move, and then do what's necessary to push this design through. So you can see this is a continual thing in life. Nothing ever goes consistently and constantly the way you want. But it's a matter of having the ability. Remember we talked about in the beginning, you know, climbing and scaling the mountain, keeping going, keep pushing, keep working. by having these clear goals, again with this loop, identify problems, accurately diagnose those problems and the root causes, and design plans allow you to get around them, and then do what's necessary to push through these to getting the results that you want. This is not a checklist of to-dos. This is making it happen and deciding what you want to have happen. It is actively taking control of your future. There's a quote that I really like by Peter F. Drucker. It says this, and I'm going to read it here. It says, "Successful careers are not planned. They develop. When people are prepared for opportunities because they know their strengths, their method of work, their values. Knowing where one belongs can transform an ordinary person, hardworking and competent, but otherwise mediocre, into an outstanding performer." Here's the challenge. Like we talked about, being intentional plus learning equals advancement. This intentional piece. Be intentional with knowing yourself. Be intentional with your aspirations. Be intentional with your goals. And finally, be intentional with your life. Be intentional with your life. This is one of my favorite quotes. It's by Stephen R. Covey. It's incredibly easy to get caught up in the activity trap, in the busyness of life, to work harder and harder climbing the ladder of success, only to discover it's leaning against the wrong